And the topic is natural user interfaces. As computers become more powerful, as we become more immersed in cyberspace, the need for more effective, powerful and immersive interfaces comes to the fore. And we'll be hearing about the different developments in that area and what obstacles and breakthroughs still need to happen.
Good evening. My name is Ken Lonyai, and we're here tonight at the Internet Society. As Dave said, it's the final panel of the evening. So I appreciate all of you coming out, and for all of you watching on live stream or watching this recorded later, thank you for watching. Tonight I'll be doing a dual role. I'll be both the moderator and a panelist. The intended moderator, Deb Benkler, couldn't be with us tonight, and she regrets that. So you'll have to put up with me talking more than I should be. So before I get into what we're going to talk about tonight, I'd just like to introduce our other panelists. I don't have their backgrounds memorized, so immediately to my right is Sean Montgomery, and Sean is now head of hardware at Ringly, which is the first fashion ring to manage your mobile device. He's wearing it. He's showing it off to all of us. He's an engineer, a professor, and a new media artist in New York City. While he was finishing his PhD in neuroscience, Sean began to consider the fact that from the perspective of a neuron inside the human brain, both a cold winter day and the embrace of a loved one feels like a sequence of electrical impulses. So Sean co-founded Sensor Star Labs, which was an agile, or still is, an agile R&D consulting group in New York City. And Sean is modeling some of his other work as well. And to Sean's right is Tanya Kraljic of Nuance. So she's a principal designer for Nuance's mobility division. Her work focuses on the strategy and design of speech experiences in mobile, wearable. You wearing anything like Sean has today,
No.
Tanya? No. Okay. In-home and other emerging technologies. Prior to joining Nuance in 2010, Tanya earned a PhD in cognitive psychology, and she has an emphasis on adaptation and interactive spoken dialogue, which makes sense for someone doing what she does at Nuance. So I'd like to thank our panelists for coming out, and I'm not sure if I did thank Dave and the Internet Society for having us, so thank you. So just a little bit about me, if anyone's interested. So I'm co-founder of NUI Central. NUI as in Natural User Interface. We're the largest natural user interface group in the world. We have now close to 1,000 people, both in New York and now in Austin, Texas. We meet in New York every third Monday of the month. So this coming Monday, we do have a meetup. It's really interesting. It was one of our other expected panelists, Dave Melville of the IBM Watson Group, who couldn't make it tonight. He's in LA right now, and he apologizes for that. But he is our speaker this Monday. So if you're interested in learning about IBM Watson, you can check out our meetup group, NUI Central, on Meetup, and join the group, and hopefully get a slot to come out and hear Dave talk. And in addition, as far as I go, in addition to NUI Central, by day I'm co-founder of Screenplay Interactive. We've done a lot of amazing experiential things using all 5 senses, and that's what led me to my indulgence in natural user interface. And now that I've told you that, what I'd like to do is just discuss briefly what natural user interface is. There are some varying opinions. The only one that's correct is mine, so keep that in mind. But the standard definition of natural user interface, or the general definition, is that anything that's natural to the user is a natural user interface. So that would mean that to a cellist, a bow and strings are the natural user interface for playing a cello. Or to someone who uses a rotary phone dial is a natural user interface. I don't really accept that as the definition of natural user interface, because it's just very broad, and that would mean in terms of computing devices, a mouse is a natural user interface, and I refuse to accept that. So what we're talking about are more current technologies that we're starting to see roll out. Things like different types of voice interaction, voice recognition, gesture like we see in Connect and similar devices. We're talking about facial recognition, gait analysis, emotional recognition, really human types of interactions that we all do when we speak to one another. That's what we're talking about as natural user interface. So a mouse is not natural, again, in my opinion, which is the correct opinion. And I don't accept touchscreens as being a natural user interface as well. So if I'm going to touch a touch screen, it feels like a piece of glass if I close my eyes. No different than touching that window. So there's nothing particularly natural to me about that, unless it's a haptic-enabled screen that's giving me some kind of feedback, giving me a sense of the surface. So in context of everything we're talking about tonight, that's what we're referring to, these types of human modalities that we use to now interface with devices and machines the way we talk to or interface with one another, communicate with one another, versus accepting that anything is just a natural user interface if you're really good at it. So for everyone believing a pencil is a natural user interface, no. So now that I think we've covered that, I will take my other role as moderator of the panel and join my panelists. Bring my questions. Okay, so now you guys can jump in. And maybe the audience, I know it's going to get unruly with all the people here, but maybe the audience can jump in if you have any answers or thoughts to any of these questions as well. Sound good? I'll take that as a yes. All right, so to start with you guys. So how far along do you think we are in the adoption curve in terms of natural user interface?
Well, I think we have a long way to go. So, you know, for voice specifically, I think you can think of adoption really in two ways, right? One is adoption by device manufacturers and application, developers, right? And there, I think we've made a ton of progress, like since Siri came out as the first voice user interface that people really started using, and now with the emergence of all these new wearables and all these new form factors, some of which have very small or no screens at all, I think when you look at the percentage of those emerging devices that come out that are playing with voice as an interface, it's getting up there. But then the other part of that is user adoption, right? So when voice is offered as an interface, how often do users adopt it? And there, I think, it's a tough question, but people don't adopt it very much yet, but it also hasn't been a primary interface. It's been used so far as really to enhance or augment other interfaces like the touch screen. So, if you have voice as an option on your phone, your primary interface is still going to be, the touch. So I think as these devices evolve and adopt voice more, that will drive some of the user adoption too. So we'll see growth there.
Right. Sean?
Yeah, and I agree completely that we're very early in the natural user interface adoption. I think, I take a little bit less of a hard-line view of natural user interfaces. I think of it more as a continuum, and things can be more or less natural. And I think we've started to see a shift toward more natural things. I think voice recognition is probably leading the charge in a lot of ways. But I think, for example, touch screens are a lot more natural than the mouse. You're actually interacting with something, at least. Even if it's a flat screen, at least there's some graphic there that you're interacting with, as opposed to this plastic thing with a little tail coming off. So I think it's moving in the direction of becoming more and more and more natural, hopefully. But there are great challenges, because as we move in that direction, we're also trying to solve bigger and bigger problems. We're trying to manage bigger data sets. We're trying to sift through more information. So I think it's going to be a continual sort of back and forth, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, as we create new ways of interacting, and then we create new things we want to interact with, and so we have to constantly be in this cycle of recreating what's and reinventing what is natural.
Yeah. I think, can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
I think also that when you think, at least when you think of voice, and this is probably true for other natural user interfaces as well, the distinction between, you know, voice as an interface, for instance, and touch as an interface is going to blur, right? Because if you think of these interfaces as just a larger interaction or conversation, where I'm using conversation loosely to mean like the interaction that you're having with your device, when you think about that, you know, sometimes voice is going to be easier. Sometimes seeing something on your screen or seeing something in the world and reacting to that, whether it's touching it or gesturing towards it or whatever, is going to be more natural. So it's, to me, it's almost like you wouldn't ask, you know, in a conversation, what's the rate of words versus pointing, or, you know, to try to get at adoption, right? People use words when that's easier, and they point to things when they're able to do that and when that's easier. So I think that as we evolve, these modalities are going to sort of get integrated into one larger interaction that's going to use a lot of different things that will feel natural to different extents, I guess.
Well, that's a great point, because we always talk about multimodal interfaces, and yes, no human uses only voice, only gesture, only eye contact or anything. We are multimodal in the way we communicate, even if it's subtle. So that's a great point. That's part of the development. So for me to answer the question, yeah, we're definitely early on, but it's amazing how much variety and what kinds of technologies are out there all in the early phases. So when there's coming together of all these different technologies and modalities, really, when the pieces fit together, it's going to be pretty amazing, because yes, no one's going to cognitively think that, oh, what modality should I use now? You just do the things, and that's the point. That's why I made my statement about being correct about what natural user interface is. But thank you. So what's limiting, do you think? Why aren't we at much deeper adoption? You kind of touched on that, but is it specifically just the technology's not there, or is there something else holding it back? Technologies don't want to invest in the companies don't want to invest in the technologies, or what do you think, to bring them farther along?
I think for voice specifically, I think companies are starting to really invest in it. I think one of the biggest challenges is still just user acceptance. So voice still isn't easier than other modalities. It might come more naturally to users, but the systems aren't having the expected responses a lot of times, so then the whole interaction feels effortful. And where I think we're going to get to is, so I think there's already been a huge investment in like recognition technology and natural language understanding, and now the investments are starting to be made in intelligence and context and like data sets, and managing what you know about the user and being able to access that at the right moments. And we're starting to see that happen, and I think that's what's going to sort of push it over the edge to make these voice interfaces at least a lot easier to use, and to make the conversational interface as natural as the input is for the user. So.
What about an awareness issue? Do you think people are aware enough yet that these things exist?
I think they're getting there, for voice anyway. I don't know.
Sean?
Is there a question in the audience?
I had a question. Well, maybe you keep going first, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, sure. So I think there are a number of things holding back. I shouldn't say holding back, that puts a negative spin on it, but that are challenges to overcome in the natural user interface world. And I think part of that is that voice is kind of leading the charge in a lot of ways and has made huge advances, but voice isn't always the way we want to interact with something. And a lot of the other interfaces are a bit stunted by comparison. I mean, we have the Kinect now, that's amazing, the Leap Motion, that's amazing. other things are coming out, like the Mayo, that are giving us new ways of interacting, but those things don't have the infrastructure to talk to all the things that we would want it to talk to yet, to make our lives and our interfaces more natural. So I think it's putting a lot of pieces together, but I think at the end of the day, the real challenge is a design challenge, is a user experience challenge. I think making that seamless is just so hard because there are so many subtle things that we do to indicate what we want out of the world. And, you know, sometimes when I go like this, you know, maybe I want my stereo volume to go up. But certainly not every time I go like this do I want my stereo volume to go up. So there's just so much subtlety there that has to be explored in a design way, and that has to be really fleshed out and understood and tackled. And I think that's something that is, until it gets to a point where it's really good enough, it's going to slow adoption, and people's awareness is going to stay low, and I think it's going to sort of take off quickly once it gets to that point for a few things.
That's a good segue into my question, which is, I think that one of the drawbacks of natural user interfaces is that they're much more limited and specialized in scope. The way we naturally interact with something differs a lot more from situation to situation. I'm looking specifically at video games here. We have the Wiimote, we have the Kinect, we have the Oculus and the Motion and all the rest, but they haven't really enjoyed that much success as much as you might expect these great user interfaces to. And I think that's because interfaces that are unnatural, like pressing a button or clicking a mouse, have the benefit of being abstract, that they can be applied to any number of given actions. It can jump, it can shoot, it can do whatever else. And oftentimes when I'm trying to like use the Wiimote or something, or dance around in front of the Kinect, it's, you know, for some kind of specialized game that has to be built explicitly for the purpose. So I guess my question would be, like, is natural interfaces always something that we want? Sometimes maybe it really is just easiest to click a button or to press a touch screen. So in terms of what do you think in terms of where natural interfaces are actually most appropriate?
If I'm going to answer that, well, you have a good point that you don't always want it because maybe there's some privacy issues or there's some stealth thing you need to do in the corner that you don't want to have to speak out or make a gesture to have something activate that you normally would do. The same way people go in the corner, quietly talk to someone privately on their phone. So there are definitely instances that it doesn't apply. The idea in general is that really we've been trained on how to interface with computers, and now we're going into what we call devices. But you think of computing 25 years ago, it was still terminals, mostly monochrome screens and typing text to make anything happen. So pre-Mac, everything was very cumbersome. Mac started to open it up to make it better. Windows followed on to that. And I don't want to date myself, but I do remember seeing this thing tucked in the side of the first Mac called Mouse, and no one had used it yet. So that was radical. Now we consider mice some kind of $2 throwaway device. So we've had to overcome these stages of interacting with devices. Now we're to the point we're beginning to do it more naturally, but it's not 100% appropriate in every situation.
Well, I don't mean to suggest, sorry, I'll just respond to that real quick. I don't mean to suggest that interfaces can't and won't evolve. They will. We'll certainly have new interfaces for things, but I guess my question comes somewhere along this like specialization/abstract continuum. Because if you're interfacing with something naturally, it usually has to be designed for the purpose. You know, you use voice and touch in this way for this application or this game or this something that, versus, you know, the way, in many cases, the way things are now, you can always click your mouse or press your button, and it will always have some applicability to whatever it is that you're using. So do you think that there's a way we can move natural interfaces along that seems natural to everything?
I'll just jump in here. Recently, the W3C had their 40th anniversary thing out on the West Coast, and they had, you know, on the future of the web, and they had a gent from Intel, and he showed, you know, gesture interface. That was his whole thing, and his point was that, you know, it was just 3D cameras, webcams, that every laptop that, Intel has now built a chip so that every laptop within a couple of years, within 3 years, is going to have a 3D CAM built into it. And so, people will just get used to it very quickly, not like Leap Motion, which hasn't taken.
Well, there is an expression, I don't know who came up with it when it was said, but technology is new when it comes after you're born. If it exists before you're born, and it's old. So part of this is, to these new technologies, everyone in this room, which is a range of ages, everything that comes along tomorrow is new to us, but every child that's born thereafter, it's already old. And you can trace that technology back probably to the wheel. So it's again, there might be a very good reason to have some non-NUI interface for certain things, and could make sense. It's very broad to answer that. I'm not saying that everything has to be NUI, but for the types of general computing we're doing, we're definitely going in that direction. You guys?
I think, I would just add to that to your point about, these NUI interfaces having to be designed for the specific purpose. The same is true, the design part, that's also true for like the key, you have to decide, someone has to design like, how are you going to perform X action? You're going to use the down arrow key, right? So it's just on the user side that it might feel easier to learn that mapping because you can see the set of keys that you have available to you or the buttons that you have available to you, and you know that your job is to learn the mapping between the buttons that you have available and the actions that the system can perform, right? And there are ways that, maybe this starts to feel to some people like a little bit less natural, but I think that one of the things that we need to do a better job about is when we have these, for instance, conversational interfaces or gestural interfaces, whatever, I think we need to do a better job at letting users know what, the space of things they can do is still constrained, right? And I think we need to let users know what the space of those things is, right? It's just like how you would use cues in the world. You wouldn't go up to like a pharmacist and order pizza, right? So it's the same sort of thing. We need to figure out what are those cues, those subtle things that people use all the time, and how can we sort of surface those, and maybe sometimes we have to not be subtle. We have to be really obvious about it and surface the right things to do and say and gesture at the right moments until people learn, what those mappings are too, just like they would have to learn for a mouse or a set of buttons or whatever.
Okay, I had a question of, most of the interfaces you're looking at, describing, relate to a computer and a screen to a certain extent. And I'm wondering if there is much research or thought that goes into interfaces that kind of relate to your daily life in a city, transversing a city and either guiding you or interacting with you, or is that too much science fiction for the moment?
On the street or in a car?
On the street, I was thinking, yeah.
There are some things like that. There are some belts that have vibrator motors, and they're wayfinding belts. So you can then you can use it however you want, but it can give you directions, for example. So when you're supposed to turn right, you get a little buzz on the right side, and when you want to turn left, then it buzzes you on the left side. So things like that are starting to creep in. They're pretty boutique at this point. And in the future, I think we're rapidly moving into the connected home, the connected vehicle, and I think that is really going to open up interaction beyond the screen, when doors and lights and sounds and all the other things that exist in your home and vehicle can now be interacted with in a natural way. That's really going to open up the possibilities beyond the screen, I think.
Okay. Getting back to the theme of our event here, is there underlying well, we'll use the word infrastructure, types of, but I'm thinking more is something along the lines of at the operating system level, device driver, that type of thing, types of standard interfaces, APIs, that type of thing, software that would kind of help to support the development of NUIs across different types of actual interfaces, so that some types of again, device drivers, APIs, operating system components, software libraries, whatever, that would help developers and end users, of course, in the end, across specific types of interfaces. So something that would basically benefit a developer who is doing something with voice recognition, as well as something for somebody who's using gestural interfaces as well.
Well, essentially today, no. So for example, Nuance has an SDK, but that's Nuance's SDK.
Yeah, right.
Ringlead does not have an SDK yet.
Not yet. Working on it.
So you can get open source voice SDKs, like at Carnegie Mellon, they've developed some, and there's lots of voice SDKs now, probably one of the most popular areas, I'd say, of NUI. Standardization doesn't really exist, and it just gets worse into other NUI technologies. Everyone is even if it's open source, it doesn't mean it's standard.
No.
So in terms of, yes, acceptance or widespread incorporation from developers, you still have to pretty much pick the platform or the SDK that you want to be on.
So it's like standards. The great thing is there's so many of them.
Yes.
That's right.
And I think
okay, so I want to pick up that thread again. Could you envision a project or initiative that would help to standardize? I mean, can you conceive of what that would how that would look to help standardize and improve interoperability and ease the time to develop new NUIs?
Well, let me just answer the first part you said, and then
Yeah. Okay. Whatever.
maybe my colleagues have something else. You said conceive of. I mostly don't conceive of it because, again, these are mostly developed by individual companies that have interest. If they invest in these developments, they have to get some return on it. Unless it was going to be initiated by something like, let's say, the Internet Society or some nonprofit group that has the capability of getting it to catch on. To that part of the question, no. But
I think, to echo Ken's point, I think there's a good bit of incentive, a very kind of narrow-minded, local, immediate incentive to keep things a little bit closed because there's so much information that you can gather through natural user interfaces that creates this fortuitous loop where you have more information about what your users need, and so you can develop better algorithms so you can get more information about what they need, and you have this virtuous cycle that puts you way out in a leader position in the field right now, because it's a very nascent field. And so I think that's a big roadblock. I think that's going to start to chip down when people start to be able to connect their devices to get real value out of their natural user interfaces, so they can connect their Ringlead to control their TV or whatever. And I think that's I don't know if that needs to go through a special service. I think there could be somebody who comes along and makes a platform like an if this then that type of platform that can take the APIs from this device and hook them up with the APIs of that device and start to do that in a well-designed way. I think that would help just kind of facilitate the whole process, and I think that would start to break down the walls and force companies to open up APIs, because then they would have to compete in a marketplace in order to sell their devices that can talk to other devices. And I think we'll get there. We're gonna have to get through this first stage first.
I shoot a lot of Internet of Things meetups. There's lots of them, and there's a big, excuse me, there's a big move where all these people are coming up with these little modular kits. There's one called Kit Kat that comes out of Holland, or I think it's called. They changed the name to another chocolate bar, but you know, and these things have things where you can break. It's like a Kit Kat because you can break off all the little bits which are sensors and a Wi-Fi and a Bluetooth and a this and a that, and you know, a little motor or whatever it is. And then you've got a thing where on the screen you just draw on the screen. You pull like a diagram out on the screen, and the things all connect to each other via Bluetooth and make, you know, and make things. So I think there's going to be an explosion in kind of like, you know, small-time DIY in this field.
As you said, there's multiple people doing that, so it doesn't make it a standard.
No.
The question that Dave asked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because on the one hand, I agree with you that the smaller like DIY type, you know, startups are the ones that are going to push, you know, innovation in this space. But the larger companies that have the, you know, I guess more money to invest, like working with them a lot of times, it's even hard for, you know, I hope the boundaries break down, but, you know, we sometimes have to work with companies where we're working with obviously GUIs and with voice, right? And even the teams that work on those pieces don't share data often, and I mean their own databases aren't shared, and it's like, oh, we can't do this, we can't access this about the user because this team manages that and we can't get into that, or, you know, so there's it'll be harder for smaller companies to push standards, but it's harder for larger companies to break down those boundaries that they have between them in order to get to a place to push standards. So I think it'll be interesting to watch.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if Sean, is it the final act? Well, Sean's going to show us his gadgets that he's wearing and such? Or,
Well, yeah, I can show you. So this is a wristband. I call it the Truth wristband. And this is actually measuring kind of how excited I am. So sometimes when I talk about it, it turns red, and that's indicating that I'm excited. Sometimes if I like smack myself, there's a little delay, and then that'll turn it red. So this is measuring something called electrodermal activity. You have a sweat gland in your hand called the eccrine sweat gland. It's really tied into the arousal systems in your body like adrenaline. And you're constantly in, especially if you're sitting, you know, on a panel or something like that. You're
Next to me.
Next to Ken. You're in this state of heightened arousal where you're constantly having these little bursts of excitement, you know, and sort of fight or flight response. This is something I think that is very likely to become a piece of natural user interfaces in the future, where ambient computing takes a larger role, so that when you walk into a room, for example, the room has some sense of you and your mental, emotional, psycho-emotional state, and is adjusting maybe the lighting, maybe adjusting how many controls are in front of you, any number of things in this future connected home. It also may be a part of managing your own psycho-emotional state and allowing you to get feedback and things. So that's the Truth wristband. And then this is Ringley. This is the company I'm working with now. We're shipping very soon. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to start pushing rings out the door. And basically, this is a way to get notifications from your phone without having to have your phone on the table all the time, you know, while you're at dinner or something like that. So you can put your phone away but still stay connected to the things that matter most by... So it's giving you notifications, vibration, light. There's a little light on the side, and so it also has an accelerometer inside of it, which allows you to do some natural user interface things, like you can tap it to, for example, find your phone. Gee, where did my phone go? And then you can tap it, and your phone will beep, beep, something like that. Or, you know, maybe down the road you can do things like this to change the volume of your stereo. Hopefully this will become a piece of the natural user interface world as well.
I just want to apologize to Tanya because your necklace doesn't do any of these things, right?
No,
No,
it doesn't.
Sorry that Sean showed you up there.
No problem. Next time I'll come better prepared.
She has a beautiful
All
voice,
my-
though.
All my leg up pulling, yeah.
So thinking about NUI, we're talking about hardware. How much is hardware? How much is software? And does it vary by technology?
I think it varies hugely by technology. I think voice recognition is hugely software intensive. This is probably, she can speak to it better than I can. I think it's a very difficult problem. I think we're going to be moving more into the hardware space. Right now, the hardware space has been pretty limited. We've had the Kinect, we've had Leap Motion, we're getting the Myo, we're getting a few other things that are coming out, brainwave readers. But I think we're going to move into a space where it becomes very common. There's another ring that just came out called the Ring, which is hard to search for on Google. But if you find it, it's actually a natural user interface ring. And there are other rings that are of the same ilk, and basically the idea being that you can create little gestures that will do things in your life, whatever that might be. You can kind of if this, then that.
So a Myo for the finger.
Yeah, sure, yeah. But it uses accelerometer. It uses an accelerometer.
Different technology.
Yeah.
Right.
You mentioned Myo 3 times, and I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, sure. So Myo is a band. I think their Kickstarter was earlier this year, or late last year.
Did they have a Kickstarter? 'Cause they're funded. I don't remember how they started.
Well, that's a good point. All right, yeah.
Yeah.
So in any case, yeah,
They're
you're
funded.
right. I think they're funded. They took pre-orders. They launched on their website. It sits on your arm and measures your muscle activity on your arm. Turns out all the muscles that control all your fingers are right here. And if you do this, a very specific pattern of muscles fires versus if you do something else like this or like this or whatever. So they're working on being able to detect that and then use all the range of motion that you have in your hand to be able to control anything all the time.
And for shameless plug, thank you. If you were attending NUI Central a couple months ago, Chris from Thalmic Labs, which is the company behind Myo, was one of our speakers. So come on out. Yes, Dave was there. Thank you. Anything you wanted to add, Tanya? Or?
No. Oh, well, we were talking about. I was just thinking about the Myo. I tried one recently, and my wrists are too small. But apparently, they have a fix for that going out. Or my arm is too small. But I thought it was really cool because when I went to attend the demo, we actually got to program. We got to wear one and then program it to play Tetris. I don't know if you guys did this same thing, but so we got to program it to say, if you do this, drop the shape. If you do this, move it over to the right or whatever. And it was just so simple to program as opposed to language, where it's like, if the person says this and they're in this context, then this applies. And it was much more like mapping a keyboard function onto, So it actually, when I was using it, I was like, this is really cool because on the one hand it is a natural user interface, but on the other hand it sort of pushes the definition, right? Because it is a set of learned. You have to learn the gestures. You can't just do anything with your arm and have it be interpreted. It has to be like a very specific set of gestures. So it's cool. I think it's a cool device. And the guy that was giving the presentation was using it the whole time to advance his PowerPoint slides. And you couldn't even really tell, his gestures were so tiny, and it worked perfectly every time. It was really neat.
I was curious too about what you thought about the software-hardware question.
Yeah, so you're right in that it's all software right now, but we're seeing more and more people want to embed the technology in their devices for various reasons. So one is privacy issues, right? They don't want all their users' utterances being recorded or sent up to a cloud. and another is just latency. So if you have the command, if you have the language embedded on the device, you obviously are saving a trip back and forth, so you can respond more quickly. But then it becomes a hardware issue of processing power and computing power and battery power, and all those things play into it, right? So, I think it's something that we as a company, because we just do the language, we don't build that hardware technology, but it is a definite limiting factor in what we're able to do, and how far we're able to take it, and how far we're able to push the latency and things like that. So I think we're getting there too.
Well, picking up on that, so one of the themes of today is barriers to adoption, or the major theme today. So you see hardware as a barrier to adoption, or will help adoption?
I think ultimately it's going to help adoption, because, I think people are going, these processing issues, it's not unique to language, it's going to happen for everything. So I think, people are working on and are going to keep working on that problem. I think the hardware thing ultimately will help, because you have all these new form factors, and that's really what's going to push to make some of these natural user interfaces the primary interfaces, the ones that users like. You're not going to really have a choice if you want to support voice. It can't be a secondary to the big touch screen that you have anymore, right? So you have to make that investment in the intelligence and the context if you want it to be a viable interface. And I think the different hardware form factors are gonna drive that evolution. So.
Sean? Is there a question in the back?
Directed at Tanya and Nuance, specifically to piggyback on what you were saying before, as hardware being a limiting factor. Is there a type of, let's just say you're building a new hardware product, in terms of a mic or audio receiver, is there some kind of basic minimum that would be required to work with some of the technology that Nuance is building?
It's a good question. People ask it all the time, and I just went to like a 2-hour training session on it, and the answer is there are a ton of options that you have available, and they're mostly to, obviously you want your hardware to be able to increase the signal to noise ratio as much as possible, and you want the directionality to be as good as possible, depending on where you are. If the mic is in a phone or a ring or something that you're probably going to bring close to your mouth, it's different than if it's in a car where you're going to have wind and radios and other people speaking. So yeah, if you're interested, I can send you like a 60-page slide deck.
Yeah, no, definitely interested. And maybe Sean might know too. Basically, in essence, it's like if I were to go in DigiKey right now and I were to hack together a product, it's like, what is the bare minimum recs needed to build a mic that could work with this advanced work that Nuance has designed?
The bare minimum is a microphone that you can pick up at Radio Shack and like glue onto your device. That will work.
Cool. The only reason I asked if like with Sean, it's like I wonder if Ringley was like thinking about if that's something that you guys have played with.
We've got a few, ideas moving forward. Right now, we're targeted at a pretty simple level. Our founder, Christina, really, she found she was leaving. She had her phone in her purse a lot, and she found she missed a lot of calls because of that. And so that's the major problem we were trying to solve with this, in an attractive way. So a little less plastic and stainless steel, but. We have lots of ideas going forward, and it's really going to be figuring out what's going to naturally address the needs of the people who want to wear Ringley. So, I mentioned we have an accelerometer, and we're definitely thinking about things in that direction. I don't know. Are people going to want to talk to their Ring? It's not entirely clear to me, and especially if they have to do this.
Yeah,
maybe they would.
Want to be like, who's that message from that I just got? So you don't have to take out your phone and look at it.
They might, and they might. Microphones tend to be a little big. This is a size. Talking about limitations, size is going to be a big one. Focusing on the hardware. That's what I do. Size, battery life, all pretty big issues as you move into, especially the wearable space, which I think is going to be a big piece of natural user interfaces, because we've got lots of fingers, we've got lots of body parts that can do all kinds of different things. And those body parts and how they move in relation to each other can tell you a lot about a person, how they're feeling, what they want out of the world. So I think, on the hardware side, there are a host of issues that ultimately come back to size and battery life. I think expanding out from there, I've touched on design and getting the algorithms better and better and better. I think those are pretty big ones, and opening up the APIs, I think those are also going to be things that allow us to really, get to a point that it makes sense to think about interacting with the world in natural ways. If I'm like holding my phone here and interacting with it like this, well, maybe I should just interact with it like this. But if I'm in a room and my whole room is interacting with me, that's going to really change things. You're not going to want to run around and touch everything. I already have two remotes for my TV and my stereo, and I have a computer that I'm trying to power my TV and my stereo with, and that's got a separate thing. So, yeah.
I wasn't going to announce this, Sean, but you forced me to. I did solve the microphone problem with the Ring with my new startup called Nose Ringly. You don't have to do that. No, we're looking for funding.
How about belly button ringling? What does that solve?
I don't know. You forced my hand. So again, thinking about today, looking at the society in general and adoption, but what about business models with natural user interface? Do you think it's going to disrupt businesses, enhance businesses now and going forward? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's going to do both. I think, for instance, this might be a sort of boring area to talk about, but if you think about the area of customer service, which actually is where a lot of the investments in speech recognition were made, so like call centers, those things that you hate calling. So there, with the advance of natural language technology, I think the whole model is changing from one of, where this person has to do everything, to where it's, you can do a lot more sort of self-service, and the people are there to really handle the complex problems, right? And the system is there not to replace people, but to collect as much information as possible, so that when you get to a person, they already have a lot of information, and the problems that they're solving are a little bit different than what they would have been in the beginning. I also think that with natural language, a lot of the meaning that you derive from it is, or that you hope to derive from it, is what users want to do. It's their intention. And so as that becomes your way of interacting with something, you no longer need, you don't need GUIs to focus so much on navigational structures. You don't need all these menus and submenus, right? You can sort of bypass all that by indicating what you want with gesture or voice. And so I think the field of GUI design is going to change a little bit, to where these things are all going to sort of support the same so again, like multimodality, right? They're all going to support the same larger interaction, and so the other modalities, like, even the screens that you see, I think will become a lot more dynamic and responsive to what's happening with the natural user interfaces. So I think that those technologies are going to evolve too.
Sean, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree that it's both going to be a business driver, and it's also going to present a wedge, a way in for disruption to take place. I think, especially in the hardware areas, but in the software areas as well, it's going to be a huge reason to buy a new TV. If your TV is easy to interact with, if your home isn't easy to interact with, easier than running across and hitting switches and things like that, I think that's going to drive sales to a large extent. I think it's also going to present opportunities for disruption. I was actually working with one of the big players in the automotive sector, and they were thinking about self-driving autonomous vehicles. And what that does to the vehicle. It turns out it totally revolutionizes the vehicle in a lot of ways. I mean, entirely the way you think about interacting with a vehicle changes. As the discussion went further, it became clear that there are some stifling forces in the automotive industry, principally around the OEMs, the manufacturers of cars, being able to pick and choose what they want in their cars, and they get to decide, period, what happens in the industry. And there's all these device manufacturers and parts manufacturers that are beholden to them, and it's this very sort of autocratic structure. And it may be the case that being able to interact with your vehicle in more natural ways will drive demand such that consumers, it may democratize the marketplace a bit more, so that consumers want this thing because they want that feature. They want to be able to interact with their car in this more natural way. And when that is a big driver, I think that's potentially a big disruptor for the whole automotive industry. And it kind of democratizes this very sort of traditional marketplace and changes it pretty radically, potentially.
So, Tanya, you almost touched upon something there. You said that the voice systems are gathering information so that people that answer calls in call centers have more information. It's not replacing jobs. The idea that this technology might start displacing people, not necessarily just voice or voice at all. Any thoughts either of you have on that side of natural user interface in business or the workplace?
I mean, I think any technological evolution comes with a change in job structures, basically. So I think, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's just how things work. So as you maybe have fewer jobs in one area, you now have a new industry or new jobs in another area. And so the skill sets change, and that's bad for some people and good for other people. But I think that's just sort of how it works. Yeah.
Anything you want to add?
To how it's going to change the employment structure. Yeah, I mean, I think voice recognition is going to change things a bit. I think it's going to be, a carefully moderated road. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever tried calling UPS. And navigating their voice recognition system. It's quite challenging.
Oh, Nuance didn't create that.
I don't know. We might have.
It's trying, let's put it that way.
Your word for it.
Yeah. And they're not alone. It's not to pick on them. It's a difficult problem. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops and how it improves over the probably very near future.
And what about government's role? So you think that government should be regulating something, should be just sitting back, or should be pushing for something? We talked about standards, but should they be concerned about what this technology will do to society?
I'm wondering, I need to look into this a bit more, but I am wondering a little bit what's going to happen when we have, instead of, I don't know, 10 or 20 Bluetooth devices in any given space, if we have like 1,000 all visible from my phone.
In terms of privacy or health issues?
Just talking, just getting the bandwidth to get to without total collisions all the time. I mean, there are only so many channels currently, and you know, I know the Bluetooth group is working on things like that in the future, meshing and things like that. But I am, you know, I'm curious how that's going to play out, and I wonder if there's a role for more spectrum or other things that government does play a hand in.
So government as an enabler.
Yeah, to allow the technology to have a landscape in which it can flourish.
And my knowledge of this is really limited, but there is so for instance now with internet there, so my understanding I guess is that, you know, the main providers are thinking about, because there's this bandwidth issue, they're thinking about structuring pay, I guess, different, like having you pay for. So basically right now, if you have like a basic internet plan, your bandwidth might slow down for, you know, someone else might be paying for something like
Talking about the net neutrality issue that's going on.
Yeah. So, and I don't, again, like I said, I haven't been following it very well, but it strikes me that that's another place where, you know, as issues like this just continue to arise, like you said, because there's so many more, because everything becomes connected, you know, I think there's going to be a regulation role there too, not just an enabling.
So it sounds like you guys just coined a new term that we'll have to deal with in the future called NUI neutrality. Write that one down.
Hopefully it plays out a little better than net neutrality has.
Yeah. And you heard it here first. So yeah, that's a question, is government really need to be involved in this? And you brought up some issues we don't really know. Probably if it were to have serious job displacement, there's always going to be that call for government to get involved. Right now we know with the net neutrality issue that there's a lot of debate how that's going to be resolved, but companies are kind of driving the quote-unquote problem. So I would imagine that in these other technologies, I want to call it an industry, it's going to have to be a reaction more than which I think is your point, more than something planned at this stage. So what about underserved people now, kind of dovetailing on that don't have very much access to technology? You think that natural user interfaces will make that easier for them to have access?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think you can see it already in the last 10 years, if not the last 20 years, the move from DOS to, or maybe even more than that, more than that many years, but the move from DOS to a more Windows Mac type system, and then and how that opened up the possibility of computing to so many people, and then now the shift from having to buy a whole computer to just carrying around a computing device that's probably as powerful as the computer I had 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and how you can walk around anywhere in New York City. I mean, you can go to the poorest neighborhoods and you see about at least half of people have these devices in their pockets, and I think part of that is that they're easy to use, that they're so much easier to use than the computers, and certainly than DOS. So I think it's going to play a huge role.
You used the word democratizes earlier, and that's what I think the direction we've been moving in, I think, natural user interfaces are the next step in that direction. Or sort of, you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to learn, it's just sort of democratizes it. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good point because the learning curve of DOS versus the learning curve of Siri is very lopsided. But Siri has very little learning curve, if any, or Google now or something similar like that. Connect might have a little bit of a learning curve, but again, you really threw the gauntlet down attacking DOS there. So, so that's a tough one that most people didn't know, but it makes the point very well. So clearly, I would agree that these interfaces, you're taking learning out of the equation and just turning it into usefulness. So, and Sean, you made the point that yes, it's you go to certain neighborhoods or see certain people with certain socioeconomic lifestyles or jobs, and that's now an important thing to own. So, a good point. But what about even high-speed internet access? Do you think that's important to these types of technologies?
Yeah, definitely.
Because of processing going on in the cloud?
Yeah, for sure. And it impacts the performance and obviously also the experience, right? And how much people trust what's happening on the device, how much they can tell what's going on. I mean, the more responsive you can be, and the more responsive, that you can be, and the faster you can do that, the more people are going to understand what's happening, right? It doesn't feel so natural if you have to wait 20 seconds for a response to whatever you've just done. So.
Right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to dovetail back to our net neutrality discussion, right now it's a pay-to-play marketplace. You need to pay if you want bandwidth. So Netflix has to pay more because they use more bandwidth to, so they pay Verizon or whoever else is carrying the zeros and ones. And I think that, and with natural user interface, that's even that much more important because of what you said. If it slows down by a second or two, NUI is destroyed. You need that ping to be really fast. Otherwise, it's not natural anymore. It's herky-jerky and it's gone. And so I think right now with this pay-to-play model that we've got going on, there are a few companies that are making a lot of money and hold the strings to any company that wants to come onto the scene has to pay them. And so it makes it hard for innovation, I think. I think it stifles innovation. I think little startups have a harder time competing with the big players who can make big moves in a pay-to-play space. And so I think back to the government regulation question on that issue, I think that could be a big factor going forward in this NUI landscape. If you have to pay to play to get that fast ping responses, it could really squash the little guys and innovation.
Just a question about the fast ping response. Is that a function of capacity, or because you're asking a voice, you're using voice communication here? That's not a high bandwidth use. I mean, I don't need any broadband. I don't need a gigabyte to send this information over to you. And most of the questions are yes or no. It's a minor, it's change. You're sending change. So it's not really bandwidth that you need. It's speed of latency. There we go. Latency. Thank you, David. Yes. You agree. Thank you.
Was that a question or a statement?
Clarification. It's not, you were saying bandwidth, and it's latency.
That's right. Thank you.
Point of information.
So, thinking about that, is there anything we could be doing today that in 10 years, besides from government intervention, that can make this stuff more feasible, widespread, and available to everybody? Whether it's technology development or training, or what do you think?
I think right now something we could be doing really, sort of easily is, Sean brought up the point earlier that a lot of this is design, and I totally agree. I think that right now, especially for voice interfaces, our technology has like grown in leaps and bounds. Parts of it are really good, like speech recognition. It's really good. Natural language understanding, it's pretty good. There's always room for improvement. That's going to continue to happen. But I think where we're kind of falling down a lot is we're not paying enough attention to the ways that what does come naturally to users and the ways and what they expect in return and delivering on that, right? So it's not enough to just put a system out there and say, hey, you can talk to this thing now, right? It's like, how do you talk to it? What is it going to understand? How should you phrase what you're going to say? How can you expect it to respond back? Is it going to have intelligent responses if it doesn't do something that you've asked for? Like all those things that I think we don't pay enough attention to. And I think that is as critical, right now as improving, another 2% in performance of ASR, probably more critical. So I think that's an immediate thing that doesn't depend on large, technological investments, right? And then over the longer term, the technology investments are, it's what I said before, it's like investing in data centers, investing in context, like intelligence, being able to bring in different sources of information at the right times and access it and store it, and and what pieces are important, which is partially a design question and partially, just the technology evolving and kind of learning. So those are kind of the two places that I would say we can make large advances.
I guess my perspective, I often come at these topics from kind of a maker perspective. And I think one of the best things we can do right now is to take things apart and put them back together in new ways. And I think that's particularly true in NUI because it does a few things. It addresses those design issues. When you take something apart and you reconfigure it, you've just redesigned it, and then you not only get to have that new design, but you learn so much about the design process, and you learn what works and what doesn't in a personal way, and I think that's really deep. And it will let you hook up, your different devices in totally novel ways. So when you're taking apart your toaster so that when your alarm clock goes off, it pops the toast, Pee-wee's Playhouse type of stuff. That's you're going to gain so much out of that, and that's really going to move the ball forward. And in addition to that, I think there's an interesting story I like to tell. There was a company called Zeo, which made a headband that would measure your brainwave activity. Measures the electrical signals created by your brain. It was made to be worn while you sleep, and they had a very closed API. They gave you access to certain things, and they didn't give you access to certain things. They gave themselves access to everything. And so this guy came along and he was like, well, I bet I can dump the firmware off of their chip and then decompile it and figure out how to get the raw data and give it to myself over their serial API, over their serial port. So he did that and then got the raw data, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, because this was one of the first really usable, easy to wear, simple, felt, it was very comfortable brainwave EEG reading devices on the market. At which point the company ended up contacting him and told him if he will take down his hacked code, which is exposing a lot of IP. They will hire him to make an official release that opens up the raw data to the end user. And I think that process, kind of sparked to me that that's a way we can get these APIs to open up potentially, and make it so all of our devices can talk to each other like they ought to be able to.
He means hacking.
Yeah, okay, the last part is good. That's what we're all very much for. But the other part, are you suggesting that to, hack in terms of reverse engineering and that type of thing in ways that might, violate terms of service or licensing agreements, to put pressure on developers and manufacturers to open up their... I may be misinterpreting what you said.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I'm saying, it's when I buy a device, it's mine.
Yeah.
And if you didn't lock down your code.
Right. Okay.
For the lawyers out there, Sean's opinions are his own, not those of the panel.
I sympathize, but I don't want to go on record as having the Internet Society advocate.
Understood.
So you're basically advocating make it happen at almost all costs.
I just think, I think as an individual, as individuals, we can force the hand of companies who would otherwise just as soon lock us out of our own data.
Well, there's a number of those we know about wearable bands that there's been a lot of controversy about that. I know a very specific NUI device. It's exactly that model. I won't mention who that is, but yes,
almost all.
Could be. Yes,
Yeah,
could
almost
be.
all devices on the market that collect your data, they keep it, and they don't give it to you in a raw form. They give it to you in a nice form, a very polished form, which is also nice. I appreciate that. And it's this virtuous cycle attitude, and it is a compelling argument to be able to get your data and look at it, and not necessarily let you look at it. But I say, forget that.
Well, I suppose I would take a little less radical approach, but going back to Dave's question earlier, I don't think it's going to be too successful to get all open APIs and SDKs, because again, there's financial interests of the developers, small or large.
Yeah, I have a thought about this, and as it happens tomorrow, and I'm not going to mention their name, but you feel free to speculate. I'm going to meet with bigwigs at a notoriously closed source software company, and discuss how they can mend fences and come around from the dark side to the light side in terms of somewhat more favorable, policies towards open source, things. And this company is very big. You would certainly know their name, but they have their hands in a lot of pies, and they're always looking for new marketing opportunities or product development ideas. So in this theoretical scenario where I convince them that they should be more open, a company like that could take a leadership role in the development of some new technology, and if they called a shot and said, we're going to be more open, we're going to have open APIs and stuff like this, or we're going to collaborate in an open source development project that relates to this, and we're going to use an open source license. We won't go into the particulars of that because that's something that people like to argue about too. But that obviously would be a game changer in pushing things in a direction. If you had a large company that in the past has maybe been more closed source and proprietary, but in this new area of potential innovation, they jump into the deep water, and then they call it the shots and say, we're going to be doing this in a more open, collaborative way. That would kind of set the tone, wouldn't it? Would you agree that that would be a positive?
That sounds like there's a lot of pressure on you tomorrow to make that happen.
No, well, I'm sort of being, I would think I'll be asked, so how would, if we wanted to do such a thing, how would we do it? And my first initial, go someplace where not much, it's still very wild, open, deep space, you know, Wild West. And there you can turn over a new leaf more easily than, you know, opening up the code to some old program that people use but hate anyways.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I mentioned Zio, which was a relatively small company, but there was an even more high-profile example of the same type of thing I was talking about with the Kinect.
Mhm.
Remember when the Kinect came
Right.
out, and then somebody figured out how to get the data out of the Kinect,
Right.
and then that forced Microsoft's hand,
Yeah.
and they had to open up an API so that
Right.
they could to address the market, and it actually opened up a huge market for them. I don't know what market share is coming now from people who are accessing the API directly, but I don't think it's insignificant.
No, it really has done a good thing for them, right? The thing is, you don't hear people say Microsoft Connect very much. You know, you go to a makerspace and they say, well, we have a new project, we're going to do something with the Connect,
Right.
and do something cool with it, but they don't, and you know, these are from typically like real hacker types who don't like Microsoft either, but this is the one, they buy it and they're using it, but they don't use the M word. So.
Well, that is a good point, because I think the hardware has a little more opportunity to become, again, open source doesn't necessarily mean open, but to be more unified or mainstream or standardized, because you can easily create something out of hardware where none of the hardware components in themselves are anything proprietary.
Right.
And if you share that, it's a lot easier, but to get the foothold in the market, not necessarily easy, but if you think of Arduino, not NUI, that is a pretty open platform.
Yeah.
There's different brands of Arduino. So,
Right. And that was very much the point from day one to make it that way. So.
right, so if someone can do that in the natural user interface space, thered be more chance, I believe, through the hardware side than on the software side. It's
Yeah.
yet to be seen.
Okay.
And I don't mean to suggest at all that I am unsympathetic to the view of having closed systems. You know, I understand the incentives, very much so. I'm just saying, when you're on the other side, why not try to change it?
Sure. I agree. Okay.
So what about technologies that are going to go beyond NUI and in the future make it, I hate to use the word obsolete, but less important? Any thoughts on that? Things coming?
Mind reading. Electrode.
That is, there's something called, if you do a search on synthetic telepathy, you will find, that there is work being done there. And what it is, a lot of it's being done in the military R&D space, but it has quite broad applications. And there, once you have a brain-computer interface and a wireless network connection, effectively, whatever you think about your view on paranormal phenomena and things like that, you are duplicating at that point that paranormal phenomenon that people sometimes report called telepathy with, with electronics. And so there are a lot of applications for that, particularly in, in things like military applications now, and that's where, like, DARPA is looking at that, also situations like, some of the same things where you would be using NUI or augmented reality, stuff like that. People are very, very difficult, challenging environments like emergency, relief workers and things like that too, where they don't want to have, they've got deal with a lot of data, and they don't want to have their, arms and hands tied up. So yeah, that is an area that work is being done, and that's our earlier presentation, which you missed, from Sandra Bean, who did a presentation on neurosecurity. That's an area that's pretty scary because there's not much being done with thoughts to privacy or security with those types of technologies either. So that we're getting into really dystopic sci-fi there with that.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I'd like to point out Sean's other persona above me.
Yeah.
Yes. I think the next thing after NUI is PUI, which is predictive user interface. And I think that's kind of in line with some of the things you were just saying, where it's kind of Minority Report-esque, where you can, where your past reactions. I mean, for example, using things like this, if you can tell how I'm responding to stimuli in my environment, you can predict what stimuli to give me, what types of options to give me, or lack of options. Then you can be ahead. I don't have to at all. I don't have to interact necessarily. It's just, it's all been calculated via some algorithm what exactly I wanted before I even knew I wanted it. And I think it's a pretty difficult problem. I mean, even just to kind of peel back the onion a little on that, to discuss reading brain activity. I studied brain waves for my PhD. I had like 96 electrodes in a space about that big, about 1.5 millimeters by 1.5 millimeters, and I recorded like terabytes of data, and then I spent years poring over it, doing data analysis on it, and at the end of the day, I came up with lots of things to say and published a bunch of papers, and it was all fantastic. But it's really tough. It's not an easy thing to. You've got 100 billion neurons in your brain, and they're all like chitter-chattering around. And then it begs the question in my mind, even if you could know what the brain was doing at any one time, how likely is it we're going to get to the point where you can have higher throughput from your brain than from your fingers on a keyboard or from your voice, you're just talking as fast as you can? My guess is it's going to be a pretty long time before we get to that point, and there's a lot of challenges to get to that point. As much as this is kind of anti-NUI, I think the keyboard is probably here to stay for a while, is my prediction.
Well, I have to just make the point that the keyboard doesn't have to be anti-NUI, right? Because when we talk about speech technology, we talk about natural language understanding. I always remind people that text is part of that, right? And we text all the time. That's natural language too. It doesn't just have to be vocal. But yeah, I think, and obviously you know more about the neuroscience angle than I do, but I was thinking, as you were talking about the synthetic telepathy and everything, that even if you were able to read brains, it's still all inferential, right? It's still all, like you said, there's all these connections and all this activation going on all the time. And in popular media, we always see these articles that oh, well, this part of the brain is responsible for this, and this part lights up when you do X activity. But it's not really that simple, right? So it's not that just because something is involved in a particular activity that's the part that that you can that implies that you're going to be able to localize what exactly is happening to cause that act. It doesn't mean it causes it. It doesn't mean it, it just means it's active at some point while you're doing that, and probably having a million other things going on in your brain too. So I think, the closest thing for me would be well, what's involved? What would be even involved in getting there? It'd be one, we would have to learn to control our there's some great work going on for people who can't speak, but who can make certain vocal movements, to be able to control that, to basically, it's like biofeedback, right? To control the signals that their brain sends, to send specific signals when they want to create specific vowel sounds, or for instance, right? So there's an element of like controlling the signals there, which I guess is possible, but it's like not natural. It's a lot of training. And then on the other end, there's this, you know, we talk about in the field that I come from, in cognitive psychology, or it's also cognitive neuroscience, I guess they talk a lot about mirror neurons. I don't know if you had this in your study, but the idea that if you sort of, as a human, you could sort of, when you're watching someone perform actions, sometimes under certain conditions, the same, let's say, activation patterns can occur in your brain as are occurring in the other ones, right? So if you could build up a system that really replicated the human brain and the human perceptual system, and you could see what that system, you know, activate the same things that system activates. Like, there's just so much that you would have to do to even get to the point of, you know, where anything like that becomes usable, never mind natural, I guess.
Yeah, and a point I often make when the neuroscience discussion comes up, and controlling things with your mind and things like that, is that you know, we actually control things with our mind all the time. We just happen to use our hands as kind of intermediaries. You know, I'm actually levitating this with my mind right now. The fact that I'm physically using kind of this fleshy intermediary is an interesting phenomenon, but you know, but it's not for nothing. I mean, it took me a couple of years to learn how to do just that. You know, so to learn how to fire the right neurons in my motor cortex and have those connect up through my thalamus and talk to my cerebellum and go down my spinal cord and go out to the right place in my hand, it took me a couple of years to learn how to do that. And I was highly primed, you know, from birth to do that. I mean, that's what I was put here to do that. And so, you know, to think that then, to your point about it being a natural, you controlling things with your mind being maybe not natural, you know, that's kind of how I contextualize that for myself, is that if it took me 2 years to learn how to do that, wow, you know, I mean, if I wanted to do even more fantastical things with just my mind, it could, and now I'm a lot less plastic. You know, I don't learn as easily now because I have passed all these critical periods in my early years. You know, it'll be, I think it will come, and it will be very powerful, but it's still got some time and a long while of maturity before it's going to achieve the scientific, the science fiction levels that we're all imagining when we think about synthetic telepathy, for example.
That's a really cool way to put that. I like it, the picking things up and stuff.
Well, I guess I'll add the last word. I'm the only non-PhD on the panel here, so I'll put it in simpler terms. We're always asked about these other technologies like EEG being, is that NUI? And I'm always saying that it is not natural, but supernatural, because of some of your points that you eloquated much better. So the way it took Sean 2 years, by the way, it only took me 23 months to be able to do that. But, so yeah, our mind's not intentioned or by evolution at this stage to do those things in some other way or through EEGs. So it's really going beyond what's, quote, natural to us. And again, the definition of natural, besides me being right, is a little bit of a gray area. So yeah, there would be a major learning curve, but in the 1950s, TV was pretty amazing. People were just getting used to that concept coming into their lives. So today, we're just getting used to natural user interfaces. 20 years from now, again, we're going to seem dated in our thinking or these statements tonight when this recording is viewed 20 years later.
Maybe 2 years from now.
Or 2 years from now. So yeah, what today is not natural or conceivable, maybe it will be, we don't know. But in today's capabilities, I would call those things supernatural, non-PhD language. So that kind of concludes our questions, unless the audience has any further questions. All right, well, again, I'd like to thank everyone that came out, Dave and the Internet Society of New York, and my fellow panelists, Tanya Kraljic and Sean Montgomery. Hope it's been useful for you, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Nice fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you.
Glad to have you. Again, I would be better with more people. It's weird.
It is. It was a good crowd, though. They were engaging.
Yeah.
Why don't these things open in terms of actually